It's the world's greatest photography course. Pay close attention and you'll learn how to take better pictures. Master photographer Leif Erickson shows you how.
Hello, my name is Leif Erickson. I'm a professional photographer, mostly self-taught, and I'm going to show you how to take better pictures. You can use almost any camera to take good pictures, but I prefer this, an automatic 35mm single lens reflex, or SLR. For most pictures, all you need to do is aim, focus, and shoot. The course is divided into 3 basic sections, and all of them are important to your development as a photographer. The first section is probably the most important because it will develop your ability to see. The second section is all about equipment and how to use it. The third section deals with specific shooting situations. Let's talk about seeing. Right now you're looking at me, but you're not really seeing me. There's nothing wrong with your television set. I'm still here. And if you're really seeing me, you can probably still see me in your mind's eye. What am I wearing? Do I wear glasses? What was I holding in my left hand? How about my right hand? Were there any people in the background? If you don't know the answers, you weren't really seeing. Here I am again. Were you right? Keep an eye on me and on everything in this program. We'll be challenging your perception until the very end. You can train yourself to see, or more accurately, retrain yourself. We're all born with a curious eye and some creative potential. But as we get older, we don't always develop that potential. We're all exposed to tremendous stimuli every day, so it's easy to miss individual colors, patterns, textures, and even the precise beauty of man's handiwork. Everything is spectacular to a child's eyes, but we lose some of that sensitivity as we grow up. And so we stop seeing. That's why most amateur photographers find nothing wrong with a picture like this one. Nice shot, but there's a lamppost growing out of her head. If you want to take good pictures, you must be observant. You must see everything the camera sees. You must pay attention. Even objects you see every day can be seen differently if you vary your point of view. The next time you feel like taking pictures and need a subject, walk to a park and find yourself a tree. Take time to study it with your camera. Start out far away and gradually move closer and closer. Work slowly. Take the time to see every curve, every line, every shadow. Once you start to see, it's easier to recognize the link between photography and painting. You might say that creating a photograph is something like painting a picture on film. To translate literally from the Greek, photography means to write with light. Photography's deepest roots are found in painting. The word camera comes from the Greek word for vault or room, it being the surviving half of the phrase camera obscura. In the 1600s, the painter Jean Vermeer used a camera obscura to create this picture, but the technique was born many years before. A painter would sit in a darkened room, a camera obscura, and paint the projected image onto canvas or plaster. During the Renaissance, a lens was added, making the image sharp. And in the 1800s, the image was made permanent with the invention of the photographic plate, the precursor of film. Photography came into popular use in the middle of the 19th century, particularly in France, then the world center of visual arts. Shortly after photography became the rage, a new art movement was born, Impressionism. The Impressionist painters, demonstrating their distaste for hard-edge photographs, produced pictures that were merely impressions of their subjects. Impressionistic painting has been a powerful influence for me in my photographs. Watch the light. As you're sharpening your skills and relearning the art of seeing, you might try a few exercises. Try this number mosaic and you'll start to notice details you never saw before. By now, you're probably wondering what impressionist painters and boxes of crayons have to do with taking a few snapshots for the family album. The answer is probably nothing if you're just shooting snapshots. But you've got to ask yourself, why did I spend several $100s on a camera to take snapshots when a $50 camera would have done the job? You know the answer. You're looking for more. You want your party pictures and the vacation slides and the Little League photos to really stand out, to tell a story. In short, to have impact. Composition is the arrangement of visual elements which are pleasing to the eye. If photography is storytelling, and I think it is, then composition is the words and phrases you use to tell that story. It's the carefully chosen details you've decided to leave in the picture that will give it life. For you, a picture may be a memory jog. You see the rest of the story in your mind. For the rest of us, your choice of picture elements must tell all. Since the 35mm single-lens reflex viewfinder lets your eye see precisely what the film sees, I'll show you why in a few minutes.
Nope, that's okay.
It's hard to imagine why pictures are taken with bits of people cut off. Look, Ma, no hands. Other body parts have been known to suffer similar fates. You can frame pictures of people properly if you know the tricks of the trade. It's best to avoid natural cut-off lines like the shoulders, the waist, the wrists, the knees, and cut off at midpoints instead. Imagination will complete the pictures. Watch. The best composition comes by experimenting. Try framing your subject off-center at one of the intersections. You can use this off-center targeting technique in any photograph. When your subjects are moving, composition can be a real challenge. But a lot of the same rules apply, plus one more. Fill the frame. Whether you're shooting vacation pictures or your son's first goal, get in so your subject fills the frame. And don't be afraid to show your subject in motion. Since every picture is different, it's impossible to define a compositional rule for every picture. But you can go for some dependable standards. Take lines, for example. Lines have a way of leading your eye towards the subject, away from the subject, or in several different directions at once. Be sure to use lines that cut your picture in half with the greatest care. Good use of lines can change an ordinary scene into something special. If you've ever taken an art course, you probably know something about perspective. Perspective adds depth and dimension to your pictures. Use the edge of a grandstand and suddenly your picture looks three-dimensional. Your own awareness is really the best teacher of composition. Look for examples of the basic rules we've talked about just to be sure you understand. And by all means, practice what you've learned by taking pictures. You're never going to improve your pictures just by listening to me. You've got to get out there and do it yourself. If you haven't taken a break yet, it will be a good time to stretch. Take the rest of the day off if you like. Give yourself some time to absorb, your mind some time to play with perception. There are two ways to take pictures: by pointing, shooting, and hoping for the best, which is the typical beginner's approach, or by using all available tools and techniques. I taught myself photography, and believe me, I remember when it was a struggle to expose each picture properly, and I've misloaded more film than I'd care to admit. A lot of my early work shows camera shake and some very questionable composition. Good composition came with practice, many rolls of film, and constant self-criticism. The technical precision came after endless repetition of the same mistakes, some hard studying, and of course, practice. Eventually, everything begins to make sense. It really does. Let's take a closer look at a typical 35mm camera. We'll start with the lens. On most SLRs, lenses may be removed and interchanged. The lens is essentially a metal barrel containing several glass elements arranged in groups. These glass elements are carefully designed to deliver the best possible definition in your finished pictures. The lens barrel contains a focusing mechanism which allows the lens to be focused on objects at various distances, from 2 feet to infinity, for example. Focusing is achieved by varying the distance from the lens to the film. When you rotate the focusing sleeve, you are in fact moving an inner sleeve which moves the optical elements back and forth. Practice focusing quickly, so you'll never miss a shot like this one. You can work quickly, but only if you know your camera. The image comes through the lens and you focus it by looking into the viewfinder and adjusting the focusing sleeve on the lens. Regardless of the f-stop you've selected for the final picture, focusing always occurs with the aperture wide open because it's easier to focus when you're looking at a bright picture. The image comes through the lens and is reflected by a mirror to the focusing screen and then through a prism to your eye. When you press the shutter release, the following sequence of events takes place at astonishing speed. First, the lens aperture stops down to the f-stop you've selected. Second, the mirror moves out of the way, temporarily blacking out your viewfinder. Third, the shutter fires, allowing light to reach the film. Fourth, the mirror returns so that you can see through your viewfinder again. Fifth, the lens returns to a wide open aperture, providing you with a bright picture in your viewfinder so that focusing your next picture is easy. Besides focusing the image on the film, the lens controls the amount of light reaching the film by adjusting the size of a hole known as an aperture, or, as you may know it, the f-stop. We really are talking about a hole whose size can be changed to allow a specific amount of light to pass through the lens and onto the film. A large hole will pass a lot of light, and a smaller hole, a smaller amount of light. When the aperture is wide open, more light reaches the film, so the picture is lighter. When the aperture is small, less light reaches the film, so the picture is darker. Once again, wide open apertures with lower f-stop numbers permit more light to reach the film, and closed down apertures with higher f-stop numbers permit less light to reach the film. The numbers are fractions, where f2 is really 1 over 2, which is bigger than f16, or 1 over 16. Remember, the bigger the number, the smaller the hole. There are two ways to control the amount of light reaching the film. You can increase or decrease the f-stop, or you can control the amount of time the film is exposed to light with the shutter. On 35mm SLR cameras, the shutter is a pair of curtains that stand directly in front of the film. These curtains open to expose the film and close at the end of a predetermined time. That's your shutter speed. This open-close action occurs at all shutter speeds at or slower than 1/60th of a second. Faster shutter speeds cause a different action. The curtains open and close, but they create a slit whose width varies with the selected shutter speed. The slit actually moves and exposes the film from one side to the other. Once again, the curtains open and close when your shutter speed is 1/60th of a second or less. At faster speeds, the slit exposes the film as it moves from one side of the film to the other. On some cameras, the shutter operates in a vertical fashion. The lens apertures and shutter speeds are designed to work together. They reciprocate. In an automatic metering camera, the shutter speed and f-stop are automatically balanced for proper exposure. In a manual mode, you must set this balance with the help of the exposure meter. The relationship between f-stops and shutter speeds remains constant. It works like a seesaw. Up one f-stop, down one shutter speed. Down one f-stop, up one shutter speed. You'll get the same exposure at f16 and 1/30th, f11 and 1/60th, f8 and 1/125th, f56 and 1/250th, f4 and 1/500th, f28 and 1/1000th of a second. If you cut down the amount of light from one source, you must compensate from another, or else end up with a picture that's too dark or too light. Here's the easy and safe way to load a 35mm camera. Open the back, and hold the film in your right hand. Don't pull out too much film from the cassette. Insert the tongue of the film into the take-up spool and gently draw it across the back of the camera, dropping it into the take-up chamber. Now, just advance the film, make sure it takes up round here and it's sitting on these teeth or sprockets. Close the camera back. Fire the camera a couple of times. Now, how do you know if the film is transporting across the back of the camera? Well, there's an easy way to check it. Just take up the slack on the rewind knob gently, fire the camera, wind, fire the camera, wind. You'll notice that this rotates in the opposite direction. Now you know the film is transporting safely. Set up the ASA, fire a few blank shots, and you're ready to take pictures. Making cameras easier to use has been a constant challenge for the manufacturers. You can buy a wide variety of cameras that will set the exposure automatically. Most of the inexpensive rangefinder type cameras will also set the exposure automatically. Electronic chip circuitry was used to create automatic exposure cameras about a decade ago. When you turn on an automatic exposure camera, the meter's eye reads the amount of light passing through the lens, and the camera's computer responds by setting the correct exposure. Let's take a closer look at a camera incorporating automatic exposure. The amount of light passing through the lens is measured by a light-sensitive cell. That cell, connected to a small computer, is the heart of your camera's metering system. The meter reports the exposure to you through a readout in your viewfinder. Some automatic cameras are aperture priority. That is, you set the f-stop based on your preference for depth of field, and the camera finds the shutter speed necessary for a correct exposure. You can buy shutter priority automatic cameras as well, where you set the shutter speed and the camera chooses the f-stop. But there's virtually no difference between these AE systems. An AE program camera will set both f-stop and shutter speed. All you need to do is compose your shots. The program camera's computer sets the exposure automatically. If you prefer to set f-stops and shutter speeds, you can do that. Many AE or automatic exposure cameras still offer the option of manual metering. roughly 80% of the time, the meter and automatic exposure system will produce perfectly exposed pictures. For about 20% of your pictures, you'll need to modify the exposure using the meter reading as a general guide. A very bright area in an otherwise dark picture will be read by the camera's meter. Therefore, the overall picture will darken. So you must be very careful if your picture contains extremes of light or dark. It's best to bracket your exposures to be sure. That is, shoot one picture with slightly less exposure than required by the meter and another with slightly more exposure in addition to the one you shoot at a normal setting. There's a second curiosity about through-the-lens metering. When the meter takes its light reading, most of that reading is based on the amount of light in the center of the scene. Center-weighted meters see the whole picture, but their reading is weighted towards the amount of light in the center area. Remember, automatic metering will expose most of your pictures perfectly. Think about what your meter is seeing and you'll rarely go wrong. There is more to lens apertures than the control of light. You can actually control the amount of sharpness in your picture by working with f-stops to change depth of field. What's depth of field? Well, quite simply, it's the depth of the area in acceptable focus. In fact, only one point in the picture really is technically in focus, and that's the point where you focus the lens. It's the area to the front and the back of that point which appears to be in focus that is called depth of field. The question you must ask yourself is, how much of the picture must be in sharp focus? How deep must the depth of field be? That depends on your subject, of course. Your answer must be matched with a decision on shutter speed, because shutter speeds affect the way that motion is represented on the film and because of possible camera shake at slower speeds. A small lens aperture provides more depth of field and a slower shutter speed. A large lens opening produces shallower depth of field and a faster shutter speed. Look at the crayons in the lower box. Only the purple crayons are in sharp focus. The depth of field with a wide open aperture is comparatively shallow. As we stop down, smaller apertures increase depth of field, so more of the crayons are in sharp focus. Most 35mm SLR cameras have a depth of field preview button. This will stop the lens down to the aperture you selected and actually show you the depth of field. If you look at the top of any lens, you will see a focusing and depth of field scale. Distance will be in feet and meters. You can use these scales to check the depth of field of any aperture. At f4, with this lens focused at 10 feet, the area between 8 and 13 feet will be in focus. For greater depth of field, use smaller apertures. Now's a good time to take a break. Welcome back. All of these pictures are different views of an essential ingredient in photography. Welcome back. I'm here to sell you some film. A lot of film, in fact, because film is the least expensive camera accessory you can buy. Shooting one roll on weekends isn't going to give you very much opportunity to critique your work. And here's a hint. Use slide film for your color work if you want to save some money. Just make prints of the slides you like. That's what most professionals do, and with good reason. You'll get the best color reproduction with color slide film, particularly in the lower ASAs. ASA and ISO are measures of the film's sensitivity to light. The higher the number, the greater the sensitivity. You'll find the film's ASA, ISO rating on the film box. Be sure to set the ASA dial on your camera to the proper rating to ensure proper exposure. In color slide films, you'll probably use ASA 64 or ASA 100 for fine color rendition, and ASA 400 for good color rendition under medium to low light situations. Why? Because the 400 ASA film is more sensitive to light than films with lower ratings. Color slide films are generally available in a range from 25 to over 600 ASA. Color print films are available at many of the same ASA ratings. You can buy color films designed specifically for use in daylight and for use under tungsten light, the kind of light produced by common household light bulbs. Thank you very much. If you're shooting indoors with a flash, use daylight film. The light from the flash has a color balance equivalent to daylight. Now, what happens if you're taking pictures outdoors with daylight balance film and you want to go indoors using the same roll of film? First possible answer, use a flash. It's balanced for use with daylight film. That's the best solution. Second possibility, change film and use an indoor film for indoor light. The third possible solution is the least desirable. Use a blue 80 color correction filter in front of the lens. This adds blue light and balances the film correctly. The penalty is severe film speed loss. An orange number 85 color correction filter will allow you to use indoor film in daylight, but again, changing to daylight film will produce better results. If you're shooting under fluorescent light, you may wish to use a special color correction filter. On television, we associate black and white images with reruns and old movies, but many photographers prefer to work in black and white. There are many advantages to shooting with black and white film. For one thing, it's easy to process in your own darkroom. Take a look at these pictures. There are a wide range of black and white films available, with ASAs ranging from 25 to 3,200. Until recently, the faster films in this range, the ones with the higher ASA ratings, were more likely to show some grain when enlarged. But now you can buy films like Agfa's Vario XL. They show almost no grain, and Vario XL is processed just like color film. Ask the lab to use standard C41 processing. What's more, Vario XL film can be used at ASA ratings up to 3,200 ASA. You choose the setting, just be sure to expose the whole roll at the same ASA and tell the lab which ASA you selected. One final note about ASA ISO. An ASA 100 film is roughly half as sensitive as an ASA 200 film. The jumps are roughly 25, 64, 100, 200, 400, and so on. Each step up in ASA is equivalent to one step up in shutter speed or f-stop. In other words, you would get roughly the same exposure using all of these combinations. ASA 100 film with an f-stop of f8 and a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. ASA 200 film with an f-stop of f11 and a shutter speed, again, of 1/60th of a second. ASA 200 film with an f-stop of f8 and a shutter speed of 125th of a second, and so forth. When you're shopping for film, you might try two specialty films. High contrast film has an extremely low ASA and produces dramatic blacks and whites and almost no gray tones. Use it for special effects or for copy work. Infrared film sees colors beyond the range of the human eye. It reproduces colors in a strange but predictable way. Infrared film is available in color and in black and white. After you've done some experimenting, it's best to settle on one kind of film and stick to it. Learn how it responds to light and color, and you'll get the most consistent results. It reminds me of a story. When I was teaching, the great photographer Cartier-Bresson stated that he could meter a scene without the use of a light meter. One of the students took him up on the challenge and asked Bresson to identify the exposure on another student's face. Bresson's answer: left side or right side of the face. The student, stunned, asked the master photographer for readings on both sides of his fellow student's face. Bresson answered and invited the student to check his answer with a meter. Well, Bresson, of course, was right. Why? Because he really knew his medium. There are 3 steps to making black and white pictures, and all 3 occur in a darkroom, either in total darkness or under a colored safe light. First, the film is removed from the cassette and wound onto a reel. The reel is then placed in a light-tight canister where a series of chemicals transform the latent image on the exposed film into negatives. Second, the negative is placed in an enlarger where a sheet of light-sensitive paper is exposed to the projected negative. Third, the paper is placed in a series of chemicals which develop and fix the image. The paper is washed and dried. And that, more or less, is how we get pictures. By all means, try it for yourself if you have the chance. Color processing is a little more complicated, but a wonderful hobby if you have the patience. For your color shooting, buy prepaid mailers at your local camera store. By the way, you should choose your color lab carefully. The film manufacturers will only process their own film. Send Agfa film to Agfa, Kodak film to Kodak, Fujifilm to Fuji. But a good local lab will do the job as well on all films except those specifically designed to be processed by the manufacturers. Light can really make or break a picture. As a photographer, you will develop a keen eye for light. If you're like most people, you'll begin to notice subtleties that you never noticed before. Take, for example, this sequence of pictures. First light. This is a time exposure taken before sunrise. Just after sunrise, a morning fog diffuses the sun's breaking light, and then the fog disappears. Morning light can be very expressive, especially in the spring and fall. By mid-morning, shadows begin to shorten. The midday sun is simply harsh, bringing uninteresting bright illumination, nearly devoid of shadows. By early afternoon, the clouds obscure the sun, the sky turns gray and diffuses the harsh light of the day. Later in the afternoon, the shadows return. In an hour or so before dusk, the sun is sufficiently low in the sky to create interesting shadows. On some days, late afternoon sun takes on a golden glow. Then the sun sets. Even with a faster film and a wide open aperture, it's difficult to take outdoor pictures at this time of day. Minutes later, the scene is dark and extremely long shutter speeds or time exposures are the only way to take pictures. If you're observant, you can use outdoor light to your advantage. Since clouds diffuse the sun, you'll get the softest light on cloudy days. That can be an advantage if you're taking pictures of people. Diffused light softens shadows and eliminates harsh highlights. Watch what happens when we remove the diffusion filters from our studio lights. Suddenly, my picture is illuminated less evenly. You can diffuse any kind of light. In your home, a lampshade diffuses the harsh light from a common light bulb. In the studio, we use diffusion filters mounted in front of the bulbs as well, or we simply point the bulb at a light-colored surface and use the reflected light source. You can do many of the same things at home with a little imagination. Here's an example. This portrait was taken with light from the window. And so was this one, with the help of a white card. There's an easier way, of course. You can control light both indoors and outdoors by using a flash. People have a lot of misconceptions about electronic flash. Here's one of my favorites. Susie Snapshot goes to a rock concert. Her favorite group, the Emulsions, is on stage down there. A month's babysitting money was only enough to buy balcony seats, but she wants some I was there pictures of the Emulsions in concert. Susie's camera tells her that there's not enough light, so she grabs her flash and shoots a roll of color film. She gets the roll developed at the local drugstore and opens the print envelope to find glary audience heads and a tiny area of light down there where the stage should be. And that light isn't from her flash, it's from the stage lights. Poor Susie. If only she'd known a little more about her flash, she could have saved herself a week's allowance. Here's why. An electronic flash, even the most powerful one, has a limited throw. A typical around $100 electronic flash for your 35mm SLR will throw its light about 30 feet or so under optimum conditions. A look at the back of an automatic flash unit tells all. This one is a semi-automatic, but you can buy totally automatic units, which I'll describe in a moment. Step 1. Tell the flash how sensitive your film is by setting the ASA. Step 2. Select a color range which includes the distance to your subject. The scale will tell you which f-stop should be used. Step 3. Push the test button to be certain that your exposure is correct. If this lamp does not glow, your subject is beyond the range of the flash. On this totally automatic flash unit, a through-the-lens or TTL flash metering system does all the work. In an aperture priority mode, simply set an f-stop. In the program mode, it's all done for you. The camera's metering system simply tells the flash to shut off once it has seen enough light for the exposure. Flash units vary with manufacturers, so it's best to check your instruction manual. The flash will recycle for the next picture in a few seconds. Recycling time depends upon the amount of light used in the previous picture and the amount of power remaining in the storage capacitor inside the flash, which the battery or AC continually recharges. Depending on how your room reflects light and the film speed and the f-stop you've selected, the flash will fire at speeds from 1/500th of a second to 1/50,000th of a second. At these speeds, you can use a flash to freeze action that the eye cannot possibly see. Most flash units are designed to slide into the top of your camera like this. Electronic connections are made through this hot shoe. Simply mounting the flash on the top of the camera may throw a very harsh light on your subject. Often, it's best to diffuse the light from the flash. You can do this several ways. Plastic diffusers are available for most flash units. They simply attach to the flash head like this. Better yet, bounce the flash's powerful light up towards the ceiling for diffusion. Just be sure the ceiling isn't too far away, that it's white, and that this sensor faces the subject, not the ceiling. This is not a problem if you're using a TTL camera, which reads the amount of light coming through the lens and tells the flash when to turn off. If your flash head does not swivel or bounce, take the flash unit out of the hot shoe and connect it via a PC cord or a remote sensor cord. You can buy these at your local camera store. Hold the flash unit at an angle to the subject and shoot. Here are two pictures, both taken on a sunny day. The one on the left was taken with the sun as the only light. The one on the right was taken with the help of fill flash. It's quite a difference. And you can do this with any automatic camera and flash system. Flash technology has improved enormously in recent years, making flash photography as easy as more conventional picture taking. When selecting a camera and a flash unit, you might consider the advantages of TTL flash metering. One of the real pleasures of a 35mm single lens reflex camera is the ease with which you can change lenses. You probably started with a 50mm lens, which sees pretty much as your eye sees. But you can buy lenses that will show a much wider angle. And you can buy telephoto lenses that seem to draw faraway objects closer to the camera. When you buy a lens, you'll be looking at its focal length first, but you must also consider its speed, its widest available aperture. This 50mm lens is my speed lens. Its widest aperture is f1.4. You'll probably want to own a speed lens with an aperture of f1.4, 1.8, f2 for shooting in conjunction with high shutter speeds in available light situations. We've designed this lens directory to help you select the right lens for the job. It shows the maximum aperture, the focal length of the lens, an illustration of the lens not necessarily to scale, and the angle of view. You'll notice that this angle is narrow for telephoto lenses and wider for wide-angle lenses. We've used Minolta lenses as examples. The lenses available for other systems may vary slightly. The 7.5mm fisheye lens, fisheye because of the peculiar circular image. An angle of view of 180 degrees, keep your fingers back. The 17mm, a true conventional wide-angle lens, one of my favorites. 20mm, very useful for landscape and architecture, as is the 24, which is good for general purpose and generally has good speed to go with it. So does the 28, very popular with photojournalists for working crowds, not too much focus required. The 35mm, hardly wide angle, getting towards standard lenses. There's the 50, good for speed, good general perspective. And the 85, which is the classic portrait lens. 135mm, look how the angle of view is narrowing down now, and the perspective is compressing. There's the 200, much narrower angle of view, more perspective compression. The 500, this is a mirror lens, still hand-holdable with a good shutter speed. And finally, the 1600mm super telephoto, very powerful, quite heavy. You'll find that wide-angle lenses are largely suited to landscapes and tight spaces, and that telephoto lenses in the 85 to 100mm range are best for taking pictures of people. Then again, rules are made to be broken. As you can see on this portrait taken with a 20mm lens. If you want to have some fun, use a super wide-angle lens to turn a portrait into a caricature. Most camera manufacturers offer a few dozen lenses, carrying prices from under $100 to several $1,000s. Owning all of these lenses can be expensive. Fortunately, there are two ways to reduce the size of your lens collection without sacrificing quality. The first is called a teleconverter. Place a 2x teleconverter between your camera and almost any lens and you'll double the size of the image. With a 2x teleconverter, your effective focal length doubles. So your 100mm lens with a 2x converter has an effective focal length of 200mm. You can buy high-quality teleconverters designed to work with specific models in a manufacturer's line. For maximum compatibility, you may need to buy one converter for lenses up to 200mm and another for lenses that are longer. This matching is essential for optimum performance. A top-flight teleconverter is not to be thought of as an inferior compromise. The only trade-off is a loss of speed. Your lens will lose about 2 f-stops with a 2x teleconverter. That's no problem if you have a camera with through-the-lens metering. The meter will see less light and will require a slower shutter speed to compensate. I highly recommend 2x teleconverters to increase focal length. You'll find 1.5 converters as well. They're optically quite good, but not nearly so useful as the 2x models. With a zoom lens, you can vary focal lengths by sliding the zooming sleeve. This 75 to 200 millimeter lens does just about the same job as all of these lenses. You can buy all sorts of zoom lenses covering all but the shortest and the longest focal lengths. Use a 2x teleconverter with a zoom lens and the lens becomes even more versatile. With a converter and a 75 millimeter to 200 millimeter zoom lens, you get coverage up to 400 millimeters. But be sure to try before you buy. Not all converters match to zoom lenses and vice versa. Here's the range with the zoom lens, and now with the converter. It's like owning a second lens. Amateur photographers seem to be fascinated by filters. You buy one for every color in the rainbow, use them once, and bury them in the bottom of your camera bag. Start with only those filters you really need, and buy more as you learn. Put a clear or UV filter on the end of your lens to protect from smudge marks and greasy fingers, and then invest in the only filter you really need, the polarizer. Christine hates being photographed wet, and this time the sun is her ally. It's bouncing light all over the surface of the water, resulting in distracting glare. Glare occurs when millions of light rays bounce off an object at dissimilar angles. When the light from the sun hits the water, its beams bounce off and are reflected in many directions. The polarizing filter will eliminate or filter out many of the reflected rays that are not perpendicular to the film plane. On the left, a picture taken through a polarizing filter. On the right, the same basic picture without polarization. Notice how the polarizer increases the color saturation in the shot. The colors are much more intense. You really don't need any other filters for color work, but you can have some fun with some of the special effects filters. Star filters or cross filters take a point of light and make it shimmer with 4, 8, or 16 points. You can soften a picture with a store-bought diffusion filter. This is a great filter to use for a portrait subject who may have blemishes to hide. A diffusion filter also adds an impressionistic flair to landscape pictures. A multifaceted prism was used to produce this effect. Just screw the filters into the front of the lens, or drop them into the matte box, which mounts here on the front of the lens. Obviously, black and white reproduces colors and intensities of light as shades of gray. You can darken and lighten those gray values with the appropriate filters, just as I did with my yellow filter to darken the blue sky. And this red filter to increase contrast. But the polarizing filter is by far the most useful for black and white and for color. You see a picture and you automatically bring up the camera and shoot. But how can you be sure that you'll get this and not this disaster of camera shake? If you're not already bracing your camera against a post or a tree or the side of a building, you really should, you know. Brace yourself whenever and wherever you can. Carry an empty cloth beanbag and fill it with dirt or sand when you're on location. Or just roll up your coat. Keep that camera steady, no matter what. There's a neat rule of thumb about camera shake. Your shutter speed should be no less than your lens's focal length. With a 50mm lens, you'd want to use shutter speeds of 1/60th and up. 1 over the focal length of the lens. That's the formula for hand-holdable shutter speeds. So it follows that the 200mm lens should not be used at less than 1/250th of a second. You get the idea? It's an important rule, one that will keep you out of trouble. Now here's the exception. You really shouldn't handhold with any lens at less than 1/30th of a second or 1/15th at a pinch. There are a few ways to support a camera. The most popular is the tripod, which easily folds up and goes anywhere. It's good to have a sturdy tripod, one that's too light, could shake, vibrate, or even collapse. A good tripod also permits you to pan the camera and to tilt from top to bottom like this. Unfortunately, the tripod can be cumbersome. A good tripod is on the heavy side and could be more than 2 feet long, even when collapsed. There are alternatives to the tripod, but you'll trade some versatility for portability. Most camera stores sell a C-clamp with a tripod-style head. The clamp isn't as accurate, sturdy, or as level as a tripod, but it's much cheaper and much smaller. An improvement on the C-clamp is this, part of the Coleman system, and we'll tell you more about this further on. For the professional photographer, a motor drive is an absolute necessity. Often, in sports and nature photography and in photojournalism, there's just no time to advance the film by hand. So if you're going to get into that kind of photography, it's a nice thing to have. Motor drives automatically advance the film, allowing up to several frames per second. You won't get every frame of the action with a motor drive. You're seeing 30 frames every second right now on TV. But 2 or 3 frames a second is much faster than you'll get by winding the film by hand. With an automatic camera, the computer will even change the exposures while you're shooting. And, most important of all, you don't have to move the camera from your eye, which you would have to do if you had to advance the film yourself. Let's take a look at a few mistakes. Here, the photographer should have changed his viewpoint or used a motor drive to shoot a sequence. The subject does have another leg. Nice picture of a cat. Tighten the frame on the right just to balance the picture. Watch your backgrounds. There's a pole out of her head, there's a railing through her neck, and she's too low in the frame. Here's a classic need for fill flash. The brightness range is too great for the film. Lots of problems here. Who's the subject? There's too much foreground and the flash was working incorrectly. Sports pictures are tricky. Select one subject and stick with him. This should only happen to an egg. In a reflex camera, what you see in the finder is what you get. Don't mix indoor film with flash, one or the other. Here the flash wasn't cycled up in time. The camera fired on ambient light. Nice picture, but the reflections in the windscreen or in the window spoil it. Try a polarizer. I don't know who'd shoot this, but if it turns you on, take it. Here we need some softer light. Try a diffusion filter or maybe a soft focus lens. Gross overexposure, probably due to the incorrect ASA. Reset the film speed. Here the contrast is beyond the film's ability. Move your subjects into the light. Flare can be eliminated by changing your viewpoint. Remember, what you see in the finder is what you get. Knowing how your camera meters light should make silhouettes easy. Shooting a silhouette of a subject against a bright background is not difficult, especially if your camera has an AE or memory lock. Simply meter the bright background, hold in the memory lock, come back, recompose your picture, and if you don't have an AE or memory lock, you can do much the same thing using the manual metering on your camera. Meter the bright background, turn back, recompose your picture, and shoot. Taking night pictures uses the same principle. Meter the subject, not the whole scene. Whether that subject is bright lights on Broadway, an illuminated building, or a neon sign. Even if you're using a speed lens and fast film, you'll probably need a tripod as well. Your camera's AE system will usually give you the correct exposure, oftentimes with a long shutter speed. Very long exposures are used to create special effects. These pictures were created by intentional movement of the camera during long exposures. Use a cable or electrical release to fire the camera. If you have neither, use the camera's self-timer. Mount the camera on a tripod to keep it steady. Use the B setting on your manual or automatic camera's shutter speed dial to keep the shutter open for as long as you like. Lightning is easy to capture through an open window. Just leave the shutter open for a few bolts. You would photograph fireworks in the same way. Use the B setting and hold the shutter open with a cable release. Traffic becomes a linear abstract after a few seconds. What about stained glass? Well, you're shooting transmitted light. The window is like a multicolored filter. Just aim and shoot. Churches are dim. Use a fast enough film for hand holding. Professional photographers often bracket their pictures by shooting several exposures, all slightly different. On some cameras, you can decrease exposure and darken the picture, or increase the exposure and lighten the picture with an exposure compensation dial. A candid picture is one that's often taken without the subject's knowledge. A good candid will reveal an aspect of character or tell the world about a relationship of one kind or another. When you take a candid, you enter someone else's life and get a glimpse of that person's private universe. You're seeing a person or a group of people as they really are, reacting naturally, and perhaps not as they might like to be seen. It's the camera unobserved, always on the lookout for a personal signature. Here are a few tricks that will increase the odds of taking candids without getting caught. If you're going to grab pictures of people, you must plan carefully and work quickly, and you must never let your victim know what's happening. Be aware, be alert, and do your best to anticipate action. If you're not working with an automatic exposure camera, be sure your camera's set for the proper exposure. Meter a similarly lit area nearby, then pan and shoot. Shoot at 125th or faster if you can, just in case your subject makes a sudden move. If you're using an automatic camera, it's even easier. Just select an aperture that will deliver a high shutter speed. How? Look at the meter display. There are no hard and fast rules about finding subjects for candids, or for any photos for that matter. Some photographers always seem to be at the right place at the right time. Just plain luck. That's good. Well, bring your body forward a little bit. Shake the hair loose again. Yeah, all right. I'm going to just back away a little bit, and I'm going to put a little soft focus on with this lens, just to glam it up a bit, okay? That's good. Well, bring your body forward a little more. That's it. Bring the hand out. Drop the hand out. Drop the hand out. That's nice. Just a little more on the shoulder. Forward to me. That's it. Now drop it. Drop. Yeah, I know. But drop it. That's good. Yeah. That's nice. It gives a diagonal across the shot. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Thank you very much. Creating a portrait presents an interesting group of challenges. Most often, portraits are created for specific reasons. A remembrance, a publicity headshot, a company newsletter or a yearbook, or perhaps for an advertisement. Let's start with the tools of the trade. This rather elaborate-looking lighting setup is a professional strobe. But you can achieve almost the same effect with a smaller, powerful flash unit that goes into the hot shoe of the camera or can be connected by an extension lead. I don't use a tripod because I like to move around while I shoot. You might like to use one. It's a matter of personal choice. As for lighting, a bounce flash will usually do the job. Plan to shoot at least a roll or two for every portrait you need. It's best to have a wide selection of slides or negatives so that you can make the best possible choices. There are two kinds of portraits. Classic pose portraits, which are usually taken in front of a pastel-colored wall or screen, and environmental portraits, which place the subject in a real-life context. I'm going to leave the selection of portrait style, wardrobe, background, and props up to you. Let's concentrate on taking pictures. Make your subject comfortable. Try not to touch the subject. Keep the eyes in focus. This is important. Low angle increases power. High angle diminishes the power of the subject in the frame. If you're shooting in black and white, order a contact sheet and choose the best shots for printing. If you're shooting in color, use slide film and simply print the best slides. Let's get back and take some pictures now. Okay, are you ready? Look in. Now I'm going to use this little fella here, so I'm going to whack the light into the ceiling. Good. Thank you. And again. Wait a minute. That's it. That's nice. Want a bit of soft focus on here? Here's another perception game. Look carefully at this block pick and identify its subject. It will become clear once you start to see. Once you've mastered the basics of light and shadow and you're comfortable with your portrait work, you might consider one of the great themes of art, the nude figure. For centuries, painters and sculptors have struggled to interpret the human form, sometimes realistically, sometimes in the abstract. Since the camera rarely lies, photographic interpretation of the nude is particularly challenging. You must consider your point of view and your interpretation of the subject. You must approach every project as a knowledgeable craftsman with a concept beyond simply pointing your camera at a naked body. Here are a few ideas. When photographing nudes, most of the rules of portraiture apply. Stick with the 85 to 100 millimeter lens or a zoom. Anything shorter will cause unnatural extremes of perspective. You may have to shoot at a greater distance in order to include the entire body, if that's your preference. And again, you may be looking for strange perspectives, in which case you might want to use a lens with a wider angle of view. It's a matter of personal interpretation. As for lighting, outdoor light will provide the most natural skin tones, with flash providing a very viable alternative. If you're shooting in black and white, you won't be as concerned with skin tones, so you have a little more flexibility. By all means, experiment with light. You can create some very interesting nudes with harsh light and even silhouettes. You might also find a diffusion filter or a soft focus lens helpful to romanticize the image. Try some of the other special effects filters for dramatic effects as well. Once again, the rules of portraiture apply to nude photography. Keep your subject comfortable and interested. And don't touch your subject unless absolutely necessary. In time and with thoughtfulness, you can bring your own definition of beauty to a nude portrait. And wherever it makes sense to do so, focus on the most expressive part of the body, the eyes. When I was a boy, I remember being called photogenic. I walked around bragging about being photogenic for a few days until another neighborhood kid said, "There's nothing special, that adults think that all kids are photogenic." I was crushed, but it's true. It's hard to take a bad picture of a child, particularly a young child. Most kids will be either attracted to the camera, real hams, or they'll be shy and a little frightened of it. Either way, don't make a big deal of it. Kids have notoriously short attention spans, and they probably go on doing whatever they like after a few minutes. Just be prepared to shoot quickly. Don't lose a great shot because you're focusing. Pre-focus first, shoot, and then find focus for the backup shot. With kids, it's hard to go wrong. They're my favorite subjects. My favorite, that is, in natural settings like this one, because they're the worst for portraits. In a child portrait session, use very, very soft lighting for gentle shadows and try and come up with some kind of a toy or game that will keep the child interested. Work fast and you should get some good shots. Patience is your only hope, and it doesn't hurt if you're naturally good with kids or if you can find an assistant who's good with them. So what do you need to build up a really comprehensive photographic outfit? Well, obviously you need a camera. This is a multi-mode 35mm single lens reflex camera. I prefer a motor drive. This one will advance the film in a continuous mode to a speed of about 2.5 frames per second. And of course, it has a basic speed 1.4 50mm lens on it. So that goes in the back. What about other lenses? One of my all-time favorites in the ultra-wide angle lenses is this guy, 17mm. Wouldn't be without this lens. Good in tight corners. This will bail you out of trouble more times than you can get into. So that goes in the back. Maybe a 28mm? Okay, there's a 28mm. Let's put that in the bag. Fine. Supposing you want to do it with zooms. Well, here is a 24mm to 35mm zoom. These are nice because you can trim the shot in the camera and you're carrying a lot of lenses in one lens barrel. So that goes in my bag. Stepping through the focal lengths on zooms a little, we have another one here. This one is 35mm to 70mm. Now we're going from semi-wide angle to a little longer than the standard focal length. So let's put that in the bag. For the longer focal length zooms, this is probably the most widely used of all of them, the 75 to 200mm. At 75mm, it's good for portraits. At 200, it's a good lens for reaching in for sports, nature photography. So that would definitely go in the bag. Of nature photography, a lot of people like to do macro. What's macro? Excuse me. Well, it's the ability to get in close with a lens. And there are two ways of approaching this. One of them is to use a zoom with a macro focusing capability on it. Macro on a zoom doesn't give you the magnification that you would get on a more conventional macro lens, but it's a useful lens. It's easy to use. Let's put that one in the bag. Here is a 100mm macro lens. They give you a pretty big image because the barrel will rack all the way out like that in its present mode. But if you add this to the back of it, now you can really put some image size on. That gives you 1-to-1, life-size images. So that too would go in my bag. For sports photography and low light situations, you really need a speed telly. Here's another beauty. An f2.8, 200mm speed telly lens. That goes in the bag. Getting pretty full now. Okay, I can't afford all these lenses, Leif. I can buy 1 or 2, but not all of those. What am I going to do? Buy a teleconverter. Put the teleconverter behind your other lenses, double the focal length. Do I use them? Yeah, they're very useful. They're optically very good. So that would go in the bag. If you really want to reach out, here's one of the answers. This is a 500mm mirror lens. 500mm. Look at its physical length. The only problem with these guys is they only have 1 aperture. So you have to be a little careful when using them. So this definitely goes in my bag. So much for a few lenses. What else do you need? Well, you certainly need a flash unit. This one is a fully dedicated automatic strobe. This, when coupled to the camera, will look after you. So that goes in the bag, along with its connecting cords and various other small accessories. Filters. 2 of the most useful filters you'll ever buy. Polarizing filters. So, I'm getting a bit full here. I'll put these in the side pouch where they'll be safe. A few other filters, various and sundry. That's your choice. So they go in the bag. Spare batteries, okay. Put those in the bag. What's this? Well, some people like to use a cable release. I prefer this. It's in actual fact a remote wireless gun. Switch it on. When you press this trigger, it fires a beam of infrared light that is picked up by this receiver, which will trip the camera. And it will work at up to 200 feet. So, carefully switched off. That goes in the bag. Now we come to little bits and things that you really do need. Of course, you need film. So, let's take some film. Here's some of my favorite film. It's a chrome film. It's a reversal film. It makes slides. It's pretty fast. That goes in the bag. Other accessories? Here's something nice. Ever get in a situation where you can't use a tripod? This is called a Coleman clamp. Open the jaws, stick it around a post, screw the thing tight, put the camera on it. That too, if there was room, would go in the bag. No way to clamp it? Stick it on the windscreen of your car, throw that. That will hold the camera. Drive a spike into the ground, screw this into a stump, attach the camera. And all this would go in the bag. And finally, of course, perhaps we'd need a tripod. Not too small, not too large, sturdy and useful. You need a notebook and a pencil because you might want to write down what you're doing. You might be making a special shot. Take a notebook and a pencil. Take a lens cleaning kit. This is a rather elaborate one, but it's very nice. Take a few plastic bags. Why? You might be going through an X-ray machine at the airport and you put your film in there and say, look, I have film. Please don't X-ray it. Or it might be raining, so you put it over the camera, poke a hole in it, put the lens through it, keep the camera dry. And maybe a few little clips, just to hold things. You might want to clip up some background paper for a little macro shot. One thing about photography, it's a good idea to plan ahead. For example, if you're out doing a lot of nature photography, it's a good idea to take a can of insect repellent with you. By the way, total cost of this outfit, about $2,000, depending on how carefully you shop. It's best to stick to the well-known brands, to comparison shop, and, most important of all, to buy the best equipment you can afford. In the long run, you get what you pay for. Landscapes and seascapes have always been popular with photographers. Shooting a beautiful vista is easy to do, but the best views don't always make the best pictures. You must remember that a slide or a print tells only part of the story. Find a picture element that catches your eye so that your landscape picture tells a story. Give it a central character. A sailboat, a pier, a building, a person, a couple, or in this case, an old wagon. Generally speaking, you'll want maximum depth of field when shooting landscapes. As for metering, be aware of very bright or very dark areas. On an automatic camera, use your exposure compensation dial for perfect exposures, and bracket to be sure. You'll find that the sun can be used in almost any landscape, providing you meter carefully and you're aware of the lens flare caused by the sun's reflections within the lens. Sunsets are easy and best where dust, mist, or even pollution fills the air. Start about 15 minutes before official sunsets for best results. And by all means, experiment with a colored filter and with special effects filters. I would like to caution you never to point your lens directly at the sun unless it's a dull red ball on the horizon. This is especially true with long lenses with high magnification. You can do permanent damage to your eyes. And be sure to carry a camera wherever you go. Taking pictures of animals is not easy, but the results of some patient hours behind the camera can be remarkable. With the cooperation of your local zoo or nearby farm, anyone can take animal pictures. If you can't get through the bars of a cage, use limited depth of field to throw them out of focus. They may even disappear. If you're shooting through glass, press the lens or a rubber lens hood, if you have one, against the glass to avoid reflections. And if the glass in the area is dark, press your flash against the glass as well. That way you'll get maximum illumination and no danger of reflections. All of these pictures were taken in a city zoo. You'd never know they weren't taken in the wild. When taking action pictures of animals, it's best to use a lens with a long focal length to fill the frame. A tripod is helpful, but it can be a liability if you need to move quickly. Use a motor drive for speed of shooting. Animals are most easily disturbed, not by your camera noise, but by human motion. Patience is essential to animal work. You could wait hours for an animal to appear. He will eventually, but not until you've given up and have a cup of coffee in your hands. For the best results in the shortest possible time, study the animal's habits, learn where they roam and when they feed. Early morning is the best time to catch most animals, just after sunrise. Birds are the toughest subjects, and yet they're just about the most popular. You'll need a very long lens for bird photography, at least 300 millimeters, longer still if possible. The biggest problem in taking pictures of birds is the fact that they live up high. Obvious. Nonetheless, a problem also compounded by their unpredictable motions. If you can, find a bird's nest, keep out of sight and wait, or use a remote triggering system. The next best way, especially in winter, is to build a feeder and set yourself up in a blind nearby. Here they come. Let's talk about macro photography. With a normal 50mm lens, you can get into about 2 feet or less, depending upon the lens. With a 50mm macro lens, you can get in as close as 2 or 3 inches and arrive at almost life-size image ratio. With a 100mm macro, you can achieve the same ratio, but you'll have a little more room to maneuver, a little more distance between the subject and the front of the lens. Place an extension tube between the lens and the camera and you'll get even more magnification. Using an extension tube, you will get image magnifications that are life-size and better. Using an adjustable bellows allows us to increase the distance from the lens to the film plane even more. That, believe it or not, is the basis of macro photography. You see, you're taking the lens out of its normal range and using it as a magnifying system. In effect, a low-power microscope. And the further you move the lens from the film plane, the greater the magnification is going to be. Proper lighting and exposure for macro work can be tricky. Use the smallest aperture you can for maximum depth of field. Your shutter speed may be quite long, a few seconds in fact, so use a tripod. Natural light is usually available near flowers and plants because you'll be shooting either outdoors or in a greenhouse. And midday light is best. As you move a lens away from the film plane, it loses speed. Its light transmission falls, and often the available light will be inadequate to supply with the 2 essentials for macro photography: sufficient depth of field and the ability to use fast shutter speeds to freeze motion. You'd be surprised at how fast an insect can move when you're dealing with a distance of a few millimeters. The flash will stop that insect in its tracks. A camera with through-the-lens flash is best for macro work, if you're serious about macro photography. And if you're really a fanatic about the sub-miniature world, take a look at this. It's called a photomicrograph, and it was taken with an ordinary 35mm camera attached to a microscope. Can you identify this or this? There really is only one way to learn how to take great pictures, and that's by going out and shooting as often as possible. Make the mistakes. Try to analyze what you've done wrong and go out and shoot some more. You might even want some second opinions about your work. Most local colleges and some large photographic stores have clubs for amateur photographers where you can get some feedback on your work. Some even include access to a darkroom. Your local camera store may be able to suggest some good books and magazines as well. By all means, use these resources, but spend most of your available money on film. The only way to learn to take pictures is to take pictures and to constantly improve on your technique. I'd like to say that practice makes perfect, but I'm not sure there is such a thing as a perfect picture. Practice will show you first how much more there is to learn and what questions to ask. Once you know you're asking the right questions, you'll know you're on your way to becoming a photographer. I presented you with a lot of information on this program. Some of it won't sink in until you've had a chance to try it out. And much of it is simply good technique or simply good advice. Now that you know the basics, it's up to you. Go out and buy a few dozen rolls of film and take pictures. Remember to pay attention. Above all, to see. If you're seeing with a trained eye, you'll take better pictures. You've sat there watching me for long enough. Get your camera and start taking pictures. And thank you for watching.